Welcome back, everybody, after the short break, and we're now going to have a couple of presentations looking at UK-led initiatives that are helping to bring programmes together, perhaps in other countries and other networks. So first we have Umberto, who's going to talk about the CEFAS contribution through the Commonwealth Litter Programme and maybe future beyond that, I don't know. So welcome, Umberto, and please start your presentation.
Thank you very much. I assume you can see my screen. I'm going to maximize the window. Thank you very much. I would like to start saying thanks for UEA to inviting us to attend this symposium, not just for giving us the possibility to present our projects, but also to listen to so many insightful presentations across the 2 days. My name is Umberto Binetti. I am a marine litter scientist at CEFAS, and I would like to start my presentation giving you a little bit of overview and explanation about what are the 3 major acronyms that I'm going to use today. The first one is CEFAS, which is the Centre for Environment, Fisheries and Aquaculture Science in the UK. And then we have 2 projects that I'm going to talk about today, which are CLEAP and OCPP. CLEAP is the Commonwealth Litter Programme, and is a program that we run from 2018 until March this year. And then we have the OCPP, which is the current project we are working on. But I would like to start speaking about CEFAS. Sorry, I think you have this little window here. Okay. So CEFAS is a research institute that is connected to the UK government. We are an institution that is born 120 years ago, mostly related to fisheries, but then today we are a way more diverse institution. We have expertise in fisheries, aquaculture, socioeconomics. We do modeling, chemistry, and the marine litter is a topic that sits very nicely among all these different topics. And we are able, as marine litter team, to create connections with a lot of other teams in CEFAS, and we are able to approach the study of marine litter not just from analysis and quantification, but also modeling and impact. So we are able to have a multidisciplinary approach to the study of marine litter. I'm here representing a team that works at CEFAS, many of which are with us today on the call. And what I'm going to speak about are 2 projects that are taking the marine litter study not just as a from the scientific perspective, but we have been using marine litter also for science diplomacy, which is starting collaboration across governments and creating a support for science across borders. The first one of these projects has been the Commonwealth Litter Programme, and is the majority of what I'm going to talk about today. It's a program that started in 2018 and ran for 3 years. You can see from the map that we were active in several countries around the world. We started from the South Pacific with Solomon Island and Vanuatu, then we went to Belize, then in South Africa, and in the last year we had a major focus on...
Sorry, Umberto, I don't know if you're aware, but certainly for me, your presentation isn't stepping through. Oh, now it is.
I'll do this. It's probably better. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You.
There is always one, and it had to be me. So in the last year, we had a major focus on South Asia, and we worked in India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives at the same time. Obviously, last year was also a time in which COVID was hitting, so we had a completely radically different approach to delivery compared with previous countries. And some of the activities that I'm going to talk about today are going to be a comparison between what we did when we're able to visit the country and what we've done in the remote delivery. CLIP had a lot of activities that were framed into 5 different pillars. We wanted to understand the land-based and sea-based sources of marine litter. We had some activities to remove litter from the environment. And then we had a big focus on using the science, developing the science, but also using it for education and for outreach. And in the outreach, we also include outreach to the policy system and to the political systems in the other countries, because we wanted to feed and inform the governments about possible actions that they had to take and implement to tackle marine litter. The system in which we organized CLIP was a two-way. We had a collection of data and information, also through consultation, and this was very important because we wanted to be sure that our actions were fitting exactly the different countries. So we talk a lot with governments, with the experts in country, and we try to involve a lot of communities and the private sector to be sure that we could adapt our actions and create actions that were very efficient for and fitting for each of the countries. And then after the consultation and the collection of the data, we created some actions to tackle marine litter with a lot of different goals. The goal to create network, to increase awareness, to build capacity, and also to feed into that legislation and policy development aspects. What I'm going to do next is going through each of these components and giving you some examples of what we've done. This is nowhere close to be an exhaustive list of what we've done in 3 years, but it's just a few examples. I would like to start from data and the collection of data. This was extremely important as an extremely important aspect of the project, because we wanted to be sure that everything we did was scientifically sound, and we wanted to collect this data in collaboration with the local expert, the local universities, and even the private sector sometimes. One aspect that we focused on was analysis of marine litter in terms of what we find on the beach or along the riverbanks. Here you can see the data that we managed to directly collect. So when we were deployed in Solomon Islands and Vanuatu, in Belize and in South Africa, we collected a lot of different items. We had a lot of talking in the last 2 days about the need to standardize the methods to collect the data, and this is what we try to do with CLIP. We use the same protocol, which is the OSPAR protocol that has been developed around the North Sea, that with small adaptations was used in all these countries. And the idea was to collect data that were comparable with each other. And we succeeded in this. All this data have been now published. They're freely available on the CEFAS website. And in the countries that we were not able to visit, in particular in Sri Lanka last year, we took a slightly different approach. So instead of collecting the data directly, we were able to find a local team that when COVID allowed, so when there were no restrictions, the team was able to go around Sri Lanka in 19 different sites, collect data in exactly the same way in which we collected data, so using the same protocol after some training. So we have also data from Sri Lanka despite not being able to visit the country. Another type of data that we analyzed was the amount of microplastics. We use the same protocol that UEA is using, which is the Nile Red based protocol. And we created a lot of different laboratories around the world. You can see on the map with the orange dots all the places where we managed to create a new lab, one in Vanuatu, one in Belize, two in South Africa, one in the Maldives. And in Sri Lanka, despite the remote delivery, we managed to build four different labs. Obviously, the approach again has been affected by COVID. So where we were in the country, when we were visiting the countries, we will be there to build the lab, while in Sri Lanka the approach has been closer to what UEA has done with Malaysia for the GRTA program, which is buying the material and then shipping the material. And now we are in the process of speaking with all the agencies that receive the lab to support them in starting, setting up, and also with the training. All the data that we collected have been published, or at least the majority have been published. Some of them are in publication at the moment. We have a few papers that are already out. And all this data were visualized and were fed to policymakers as well. The idea was to be able to use the data to create awareness, not just in the population, but also in the people that were supposed to take effective action. And we had several steps of consultation with the government in which we tried to take all the data that we had collected and also try to make them fruitful for the legislation. At the same time, we spoke with a lot of agencies in the different countries because we wanted to support them in starting long-term monitoring. As we heard earlier today, the long-term monitoring is quite important. And we think that there is a strong will from the countries to work on producing their own data. The problem that we've seen for Malaysia or for Thailand that have been in the top countries identified as top polluters in the world, but people don't really know where the data are coming from. It's something that we face as well. Sri Lanka has been classified as the top 5th producer of marine litter, and they have the same questions. They don't know how the data and the ranking has been done exactly. So there is a lot of interest for developing the capacity inside the country to create this data to be able to speak and in case question the current ranking. As I said, on top of collecting data, we were doing a lot of consultations with a lot of different stakeholders. This was based on a mixed hybrid system in which we were doing some desktop study. We were mapping the stakeholders, and then when we went to country, we tried to create the network, and we tried to collect as much information as possible from as many different types of stakeholders as possible. The pictures you can see here are just some examples of the events we were running. We had a lot of help from the British High Commissions around the world. This is one of the advantages of being connected to the government of the UK, because we have posts in country that are able to support us, and especially during COVID, when we had to talk with people without being in the country. The support of the British High Commission was extremely important. The collection of this data, the collection of all this information through the consultation was also connected to one of the first outputs that we wanted to reach, that was creating the network. What we noticed is that sometimes we were not the only one not knowing what was going on in the country, but even people within the countries that we were visiting were not really aware of what was happening in their own country. So we created a series of conference meetings, workshops, in which we brought together people from different parts of the countries. For example, the bottom picture here is an academic workshop that we run in South Africa with a lot of different universities from the country. And we were able to do this collection of data at the same time creating the network. And we have seen that this has been extremely useful for sustain the activities over the long term, because the government has the knowledge about everything, all the activities that are going on, and they also have the support of all the different components of society. We couldn't do this in the same way during COVID, obviously, so the remote version of this was the creation of online events, the major one of which last year was the Commonwealth Litter Programme Marine Litter Colloquium for South Asia, in which we connected a few experts from India, from Sri Lanka, and from the Maldives to talk about what the priorities were in terms of research on marine litter and on microplastics. At the same time, the event was attracting the attention of the governments of these three countries, and we had the opportunity of having Secretary of State from India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka, and also the British High Commissions from the three countries. So it was a very successful event, and really shows how the remote delivery can still be used to create a network in countries, but also across countries. Another one of the major outputs that we had was increasing awareness. We have done this in several different ways. One of the major targets was education, so going in the schools and targeting the young kids. We have developed these education packs that, again, are freely available on our websites, and they are in different languages. We have a version in Spanish, in Sinhala, in Bislama for the South Pacific, and we adapted slightly these education packs to each country. You see here there is a picture of Sri Lanka. This is especially from the Sri Lanka education packs. And when we were in Sri Lanka, since it was COVID time, we understood that e-learning started to be very important. So the kids were not going to school, but they were learning through an online platform from the Ministry of Education. And so we developed a few videos for the kids to explain the importance of marine litter and to give them scientifically sound information about why they should not litter around their islands, and what are the major impacts that plastics are having on their environment. And these were handed over to the Ministry of Education, that is now looking at publishing them on their website. When we were able to visit, we also did a lot of outreach events. We talked to the community. We went to do beach cleanups with a lot of different groups across the countries. We also had some art competitions, and we had a lot of very, very nice pieces of art that were produced with marine litter collected from the environment. Obviously, again, COVID hit, so we couldn't do this type of outreach, but we realized that the media could be a very useful way of spreading awareness about marine plastics and marine pollution. So we created a series of contents. We have a lot of videos, radio adverts, and also some banners for newspapers. And currently we are working with the government of Sri Lanka to release all of this material to national TV channels and radio stations. The other aspect, which is very close to what UEA has done through the GRTA program, is the capacity building. We want to give knowledge to local officers to be able to leave basically a legacy, so they're able to produce the data after the project is finished. When we were in the country, we were able to actually meet all these people, explaining them how the laboratory was working, how to do the collection of the litter on the beach, and also how to analyze this data and to gather all the information out of the data. So not only data gathering, but also data interpretation. During the pandemic, we had to move this online. And in the same way as UEA has done, we have produced some videos to train people. And this is a screenshot from one of the webinars that we did with the laboratories. So again, it was a hybrid system in which we had live events with questions that could be asked to our experts, but also we left a legacy of videos in country that people can access over the long term, so that they can keep on training people even if we are not there. And this was very important because, again, we wanted to leave a legacy. So this was one of the major aspects of the program. The last output that I would like to present is our feed into the legislative actions. And this is something that I understood yesterday at the end of the symposium yesterday, that it's something that the program that UEA has done would like to explore a little bit more. It has been a very long process for us to work with the governments. Again, being part of the UK government has been very useful to have that government-to-government approach, especially about legislation. The major goal that we had was in Belize, where we managed, in just 4 months of visit in the country, we managed to gather all the information, create a list of actions to tackle marine litter, and at the end, the Belizean government realized the importance of this plan, and what they did was creating a new legislation. So they implemented the Marine Litter Action Plan that is now a piece of legislation within Belize. This is a very long process, but again, thanks to the British Commission, and also thanks to very proactive governments that were hosting us, we were able to reach this very important goal in relatively short time. So CLIP is finished in March this year, but based on the success of CLIP, the DEFRA, which is the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, has decided to create a new program that is called OCPP, which is the Ocean Country Partnership Program, which is way bigger than CLIP. As you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, there is a lot of activities going on under this new program. We are keep on working in the same countries, and we are going to work also in new countries. And the idea is that OCPP will last 5 years, so the number of countries that we are active in will increment in this time frame. We are not just doing marine litter, but we are doing marine pollution, so we will integrate water quality or noise as other types of pollution that we want to analyze. We're also having activities related to the production of seafood, in particular aquaculture, and we have an entire aspect related to conservation of biodiversity. All the activities we are doing at the moment are mostly related to what we did with CLIP, but we are also starting new activities. And all the actions are falling under 3 pillars this time. One is education and outreach, still very important. And then science, in terms of developing science across borders. So that is that science diplomacy that I was speaking about at the beginning of the presentation. And also we want to keep feeding all this information for policy development in all the countries. So we would like to support the other government in taking action based on scientific evidence. The system is still the same. We are still gathering data. We are still doing consultation with a lot of different stakeholders around the countries. As you see, instead of action to tackle marine litter, we are now tackling marine pollution. But basically, the outputs are the same. And there is actually a 5th output that I did not include, but is one of the major goals of OCPP, which is tackling poverty. So we want to be sure that through tackling pollution, increasing the security in the seafood production, and preserving the biodiversity in all the countries, we want to be able to reduce poverty around the world. One of the actions that we did is in Sri Lanka. This is one of the new activities related to OCPP, has been the support to Sri Lanka when the Express Pearl caught fire off the coast of Colombo. This was a shipping vessel with a lot of containers, most of which contain some nurdles, so little piece of plastics, and we are now supporting the government of Sri Lanka, analyzing the samples that they have collected on the beach, but also giving them some expertise and sharing expertise to respond more efficiently for possible future incidents of this type in Sri Lanka. Now, I would like to close with some lessons that we learned in the process. We learned a lot in the 3 years. The general approach is that there is a lot of concern globally about plastic pollution, and all the talks that we heard today are really fitting this. And this means that science diplomacy can be based on marine litter. Marine litter is a topic, and marine plastics are a topic that can be used to start conversations and collaborations across governments. The countries want to produce their own data, so this is one of the major output that people should be interested in doing, because the priorities are country specific. So each country has some different needs, and so the solutions should be targeted to the specific country. And there is the need of that network, not just to understand the priorities, but also to be sure that the actions are implemented and sustained over the long term. And this network has to be as wide as possible, so including academia, government, experts, and the private sector is especially important. There is a lack of awareness. This is another very important aspect that has to be tackled. And the logistic could be a problem, especially during the remote delivery. Also, in terms of permits, this is just an example, the permits, to say that the system, the deployment system, and the type of project has to be tailored to each country. The same system doesn't work everywhere around the world, so there is a lot of preparation that has to be done country by country to be sure that the project is successful. And we also saw that the continuous engagement is important to maintain momentum. So we cannot have projects that are stopping and starting all the time, but a longer term project is very important and is creating that motivation in all the stakeholders to implement the action. In terms of science, everything has been said already today. The need to use comparable methods, to have data that are freely available, trustable data. And I would like you to read the papers for the scientifically more detailed studies that we did. And the last part is about the remote delivery. We learned a lot in the last year. We have seen that videos can be a useful tool for training and actually leave a longer term legacy. The shipment of samples, so doing science from remote is very difficult, and this should be taken into account when this type of projects are conceptualized. The calls instead of meeting, like what we're doing today, we have seen are faster to organize, so they can be a very useful tool to increase stakeholder engagement. At the same time, there are still some problems in terms of engagement, so we still think that a visit to the country is important to be included in the project. And then we have seen the importance of media like TVs and radio to do outreach and education when you're not in the country. And I would like to finish saying that we are really open for collaborations. There is a lot of material on our websites. You can download education materials, scientific reports. All our publications are open source, so you can go and download our papers. And we have this network of labs in the country, in several countries. So we would like to open collaboration and create bridges across labs around the world. And that was me. If you have any questions.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Umberto, for that really useful and comprehensive overview of the CEFAS programs. And I think there will be lots of things to discuss from that. But I'm wondering if maybe it might be better to hold off wider discussion of your contribution until the discussion session after Holly has spoken. So if you're okay to do that, we'll maybe
no problem.
move on, and I'll invite Holly Nel to talk about the Pan-African Microplastic Network and her role in initiating that project and the lessons learned perhaps from that programme. So welcome, Holly.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can, but you're not. You're still in edit mode.
Yes. As soon as I press begin, then I think I lose everyone. So I just wanted to double check you can see my screen first. Great. Thank you very much for having me today and inviting me to give this talk about networks. So as mentioned, my name is Holly Nel. I am originally from South Africa, but 4 years ago, I moved to the UK and became a research fellow at the University of Birmingham. And very recently, the last 2 weeks, I've joined the CEFAS team. So I'm very excited to see what my future holds there. But today I'm going to be talking about a network called the Pan-African Microplastic Network. And this was a network that was created at the end of last year, but really we had our official launch in January of this year. So it is very new. And this was created by 3 colleagues and myself. So you can see here we've got Elvis. So he is from Ghana, but he has just recently got his PhD from a university in Australia. And then Fedara and Athena are both from Nigeria. And Fedara is currently just gone to the US to do a postdoc there for 2 years. So I'm going to give a brief overview of why we established this network and what we've accomplished in the last year. I would like to highlight that all of us, as you can hear, I worked at the University of Birmingham and now at CEFAS, we were all doing this as an independent project, so in our spare time. And we also have not been funded at all. So setting up the website and continually updating the website has come from funds from our personal bank accounts. Click. No, next. Oh, there we go. Just had to click a bit harder. So why did we actually set up this network? It was about September 2020, middle of lockdown. I was reading a couple of articles from the conversation, and I came across this article really that looked at why it's time that researchers in Africa should no longer be working in silos. And this wasn't specific for the plastic pollution problem. It was actually about infectious diseases. And it was saying that when you're competing for such limited resources, it's better to work together, avoid duplication, and actually share knowledge and resources and be able to really tap into that financial capacity that is there. And it really resonated with me. And I thought about it from a plastic point of view, especially because a lot of the work that I had done in South Africa was on plastic pollution and on microplastics. And I found it extremely difficult and had a lot of lessons learned that meant that I wasted a lot of resources and time because I wasn't familiar with what other people were doing in the area. So this kind of brought us to this question of really, from an African point of view, who is working on microplastics? Who are they working with? Who are they collaborating with to deliver these projects? And how are they delivering these projects? What infrastructure do they have available in country to analyze these samples? As most of us are aware, the smaller the particle is, the more state-of-the-art equipment is needed for polymer identification. And especially in more recent years, not when I started, but in more recent years, if you want to get your paper published, you need to have a certain amount of polymer identification. And that's also really important because the smaller sizes are considered potentially the sizes that are going to cross the blood-brain barrier or be taken up by a larger range of organisms. So it is important that that capacity is built not only in hubs across the globe like Europe and the US, but also in Africa. Before I move on, what we did want to also say was from this paper, we looked at this information, and what we were finding was, and we don't want to harp on it too much, but you can see from the black dots, that's areas where research was being done in Africa, but not by African researchers. No African researchers were involved. Where we also found that a lot of the research being done was either nationally, so African researchers were working only in their country, but when they were collaborating with external partners, these external partners were not from other African countries. They were from overseas countries. And this kind of brings into the fact that if you are looking to collaborate, you want to fill a gap, and that gap is usually polymer identification. And it comes back to the fact that there is limited infrastructure in Africa for this polymer identification. Therefore, lots of African researchers are collaborating with overseas partners to fill that gap rather than working with other African countries. So there was very, very minimal collaboration between African countries. So different types of external partnerships that we noticed when we were reviewing all the papers and when we discussed with different researchers in Africa. As I mentioned, we do it even in the UK, but you co-author and work with partners that can fill a gap that you cannot fill within your department or your university. So if there is a co-author that has infrastructure that is able to do the polymer identification, then go for it. A lot of people were collaborating with researchers to fill this gap. Other examples were actually commercial labs. So researchers were working amongst themselves, but then sampling and taking the samples and sending them to commercial labs. This is obviously very costly, but if you do have the resources, that is an option to send. There are more and more commercial labs that are analyzing microplastics for their polymers. Other options are these visiting fellowships. So one of the co-authors that were on the paper that we published, which I'll show you in the next slide, did a DAAD, which is a German fellowship where you can go to Germany and take your samples and work with German researchers and use the infrastructure that is there to analyze the samples that maybe you collected in Africa. Another option is the Association of Commonwealth University. They had a Blue Charter Fellowship. Again, another colleague of ours, Trisha Naidu, went to the UK to Plymouth University, took his samples that he had collected in Africa and gained skills on a micro FTIR and analyzed his samples using the micro FTIR. Unfortunately, as beneficial as these fellowships are for developing skills, once you go back to your African country, you are faced with exactly the same problem, the lack of infrastructure and the lack of opportunity to share those skills and training with your fellow colleagues. So really, these three options leave us with a bit of a dependence on overseas partnerships, making Africa not dependent on itself. But what you've seen this yesterday from Andrew Mace's talk and as well as Umberto's talk, setting up these labs in country is really beneficial because it means that researchers don't have to go abroad. And if they do go abroad, they can come back and utilize the skills that they've developed. It also means that it reaches a lot more colleagues in country because a lot of people can go to these labs, use these clean facilities and the infrastructure that's been developed there. So it has a far-reaching a legacy that Umberto mentioned. So all of this is a bit of a background on why we set up the network. We wrote this all into a paper. So the authors are from South Africa, Zimbabwe, the UK, and Nigeria. And Fedora was one of the network founders, was also on the paper with me. And one of the outcomes was really to create a network to increase collaboration and communication amongst African researchers working on microplastics. So as I mentioned, what do we want to see as the core team of the Pan-African Microplastic Network? We want to see increased collaboration amongst researchers. We don't want research collaboration to stop with external overseas partners. We see the value in that, but it shouldn't be the only partnership that is happening in Africa. This is especially important because of the fact that a lot of our rivers and lake systems are transboundary. And as Andrew Mace mentioned in the comments earlier, atmospheric microplastics is a huge knowledge gap, and we know that there is going to be a huge amount of distribution within Africa through this transport pathway. And of course, we also wanted to share knowledge. What are people working on, really to avoid duplication and share best practices and share what worked and what didn't work. So as I mentioned, we set up, the four of us started talking at the end of last year. By January, we had put up our website, so that was really exciting. So we shared our website, and I'm happy to share that in the chat. And then by February the 4th, we had our first inaugural webinar, and we invited people from different countries in Africa. And we also did include people from international research groups, and we invited international research groups to talk because, as I mentioned, we still think that that is an important knowledge transfer pathway. So we had 83 people attend our inaugural webinar from 21 different countries. We wanted to continue this knowledge transfer, and obviously we couldn't go in country. We also have no funds. So we thought about this idea of just having a club talk once a month where we invite a researcher to give their background, to see what they're working on, share information about various topics that are specific to microplastics. So you can see that we had 9 club talks after February, so we didn't have one in December. We decided to give everyone a break for December and give ourselves a break as well. But you can see we have South Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, and also the UK. And some of the really great talks was, for example, we invited James Wakibia from Kenya, who actually isn't a scientist, but he's an activist, a photographer, and he showed us really what a significant role civil society can play in fighting plastic pollution. And also, for example, Dr. Conrad Sparks from South Africa recently developed a microplastic lab and wanted to show what you can do on a budget and some of the challenges that he faced trying to set up a lab on a budget from scratch. So where is our network at the moment? We have about 200 members from 25 different countries, 11 African countries. As you can see, where I've put the stars is where our network members are from. And this parallels what you saw in the publication, where this is where research is being done regardless. So we really need to tackle how to engage the rest of Africa. And that's something that the 4 of us are going to talk about in our December meeting. And that's going to be one of the aims for next year. One of the huge outcomes, and please, I'm not sure what the time is, so I hope I'm not going over time, but one of the huge accomplishments of this network was the award by the Jennifer Ward Oppenheimer Research Grant was presented and given to Gideon Adua. So he is one of our research or network members. He contacted us a few months after, or a month after, he wrote a short proposal, and he basically said, listen, I've got this idea about connecting researchers in Africa, and I want to work with as many researchers to look at the microplastic and chemical co-contaminants and how they affect ecosystem and human health. And I need your help. Could you introduce me to some of your network members? So we sent out an email, we gathered emails and email addresses and gave them to him, and there were about 35 respondees from 11 different countries, and he integrated those delegates and those countries into his research plan. And he was then awarded this project. He was one out of 300 projects across Africa. So it wasn't like they chose a number of different projects. They literally only chose his project. And he's now been funded for 3 years. And he's going to really, I think, make huge waves in research in Africa on microplastics and its effect on the ecosystem. So as I mentioned, we really want to extend our reach into the rest of Africa, and we're trying to figure out ways. So if you have any suggestions on how we can do this, one of the ways we did was these popular articles. So last month we wrote a popular article about why these networks are important for us to create a community to solve plastic pollution. And we were really hoping that this would move into other countries and get some traction to get people interested in joining our network. And I just want to end off with what we're hoping to do for the future. A lot of us have seen, and we saw such a great example of it with open access databases today. We really want to create an African specific open access database, whether that tells us about what expertise are happening or available in Africa, what equipment is available in Africa. As I mentioned, sharing equipment is going to be so fundamental when resources are so limited. And then obviously sharing data, harmonizing data, as mentioned this morning and this afternoon. And then also we would really like to have these regional collaborating centers. So as mentioned, when you have these centers, instead of going overseas, African researchers could go to these centers and actually have access to clean rooms. If you're starting out and you want to develop baseline data, going to these clean rooms where there is infrastructure is going to be fundamental for then getting funds to start your own lab. This is obviously hindered by the fact that we don't necessarily have free movement in Africa and between African countries, which is very different to what is happening or in Europe, where you can move around a lot easier. So I think that is me. Thank you very much, and I hope I haven't gone over time.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Holly. We have plenty of time, I think, now to take questions about this these talks on networks and building expertise and infrastructure in different countries and regions. And I think this can just lead us on into the general discussion that we have for the rest of this session. So hopefully these talks have provided some different perspectives for people on this call about you know, the approaches that are being taken to build this capacity, and also perhaps crucially to try to unify practice and to agree common methods, common reporting standards that we can use. And I think it does also highlight the problems that are often encountered in countries, particularly in relation to microplastics, which is my personal interest, of course, in terms of identification of microplastics, and the fact that there is still a very big kind of bottleneck in identification of microplastics, and a very expensive infrastructure that's required for that. And of course it depends how small you want to go. If you're monitoring larger microplastics in the kind of millimeter to a few hundred micron range, then you have far more affordable options. Still expensive and limited perhaps, but far more affordable. But if we want to start characterizing the really small microplastics, then there is still a huge problem. And it's still a huge problem for many researchers in the UK and in Europe and in other countries as well. And you know, we don't all have the infrastructure and the resources that we would like to have to apply you know, the kind of best state-of-the-art techniques to these problems. So even yeah, in more developed lab infrastructures, we still have big problems with that, and the need to share a lot of equipment and expertise to get this job done. So I think I'd be really interested to hear input from others about how they think these problems and issues can be taken forward, how we can maintain some of these excellent networks and initiatives that have been set up and developed. And clearly money has been, it's kind of mentioned in the background of many people's talks, but ultimately many of these initiatives require funding, and it's been great that pump priming funding has been found from various sources to begin a number of initiatives. And I think we've, in a sense, we've reached a very exciting junction in this whole story, where problems have been identified, mechanisms and solutions to feed science through to policy are being developed and implemented. So you know, scientific information is feeding into action plans, which is of course great to see, because ultimately that's what it's all for. But the danger is always that when the initial pump priming funding dries up, the projects kind of stagnate, or in the worst case, they wither and die, because we simply don't have the mechanism to carry them forward. So I invite all of you really to engage in this conversation and see what we can come up with in terms of initiatives joining together in useful ways to move regional, national or international developments forward. And I see, Umberto, would you like to start?
Yes. First of all, I don't know if you've seen, there are some questions in the chat, but commenting on what you've just said, when we were in South Africa a couple of years ago, we had a meeting with all the universities. And one of the points that came up was, we know that microplastics are a problem, so now we have to take action. So there is, especially in areas where the resources are quite limited, there was a question being asked about where we have to focus the attention. If it's keep on analyzing the data and collecting new data, or whether we have to just focus on taking action. And what we've seen going in all the countries is that there is this strong interest of producing data that are country relevant. So even if in general there is a lot of data already going on, we've seen the database in Singapore, for example, as a way of gathering all this data together. But there is this strong interest for understanding exactly what's happening, rather than relying on data collected somewhere else. But there is that problem of funding. So I think whenever we start a new project, we really have to understand how to strike that balance between focusing on the data and collecting new data, but really using the data for that policy implementation.
Mm-hmm. And I saw that that Azani asked about I've lost the
about the plastics in schools.
Yeah, about sorry, yes, I lost my thread about educational resources, and I think I was struck very much when you were talking, Umberto, about the various resources that CEFAS have developed for education and you know, to be used in in school and educational environments. And I know that within the a couple of projects that are going on in Malaysia right now, there are actions to look at bringing educational resources about plastics into schools, and you know, to make that information available. I think this is possibly a great opportunity for, you know, it's not really my field, but to get people together here. Because I think some of the lessons you've probably learned from developing your resources are very relevant to the developing discussions that are taking place in Malaysia at the moment, to consider how to do that in a Malaysian and a Southeast Asian context. So I think there are some really useful opportunities for people to get talking to one another in that area. I was also struck by your comments about the social networking and kind of media campaigns that you've been developing for Sri Lanka, and I think that chimed very much with some comments that came up yesterday in relation to how you put this into the minds of the public a number of times with Holly about the fact that there has been a lot of pressure over the last couple of years to improve the quality of microplastic publications, and a lot of that I think resulted from recommendations from Kuhlman's group and others about the need for explicit identification of types of microplastics in order to validate a study as being useful in any way or believable in any way. And I have some personal views on that, which I don't necessarily need to share too much. But I think one of the negative aspects of that drive has been that a lot of potentially very valuable information is not getting published because many local studies perhaps can't reach that level of analysis, but have still made really useful empirical observations that could contribute, for instance, into the grey literature of the Singapore database content, for instance. And I am worried that as a community we are losing a lot of that information, and we're discouraging people from doing that kind of research because you know, a number of groups who maybe have access to the best equipment are basically discouraging that kind of research as a valid way forward, and I think that is potentially a problem that needs to be addressed in the international community. And one way of addressing it, of course, is to make high-level equipment available to far more researchers through collaborations in country or in region centres of excellence and so forth. And I hope that might, you know, that might arise in the coming years. But at the moment, it's very much done on an ad hoc basis. And there is, from my perspective, it's a kind of uncomfortable colonialization of microplastic science, which is saying that unless you do it our way, it's not worth doing. Yeah, as I said, that really worries me conceptually, because I think we're going to be missing a vast amount of really valuable information. And if we look back, you know, all the microplastic research which is going on now is based on initial findings that were published 5 to 10 years ago, when very little of that type of analysis was done. But nobody now is saying that, you know, that research was irrelevant or had no value because it didn't meet this particular, you know, threshold of detail. Let's call it detail in its analytical approaches. So yeah, that's something I think we, as a community, we really need to guard against. So sorry, Holly.
I just wanted to say something about this idea of polymer identification and the techniques that are necessary for identifying different polymers. And something that we discussed in the paper that we published, and also amongst the network members and in meetings, is the fact that a lot of the equipment that is designed to do these, you know, the polymer identification is not made in Africa. It's not made for the African environment. The humidity, the constant outages of electricity, a lot of the maintenance. I mean, you know, I've worked with a machine that broke down so often, but luckily I was in the UK, so the technician, you know, popped over, you know, every few weeks and fixed it, and that's not possible in a lot of the African countries. And I think when we make these recommendations of harmonization and what needs to be put in monitoring plans, we've got to think about the fact that these pieces of equipment aren't designed in Africa. So maybe having equipment that is designed in Africa for the African scenario is something that we need to look into on a way forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you, in terms of developing appropriate infrastructure, Umberto or Andy maybe can comment on this. How have you sought to provide that in-country infrastructure for the labs that you've been setting up under the CLIPN program?
Good question. It has been a huge challenge, and actually Andy has been heavily involved in shipping things around. That is one of the reasons why I said at the end of my presentation that a presence in country, even during the remote delivery, is still useful, because having somebody that is in country and is able to clear customs, or being able to go to the deposit and take a piece of equipment and bring into the university, it's way easier to do rather than following everything from abroad. The approach we had was trying to buy everything that was available in country from country. So finding local companies that will sell this, but everything that could not be bought in country, we were buying it in the UK and then shipping it. And obviously that comes with a lot of challenges for logistics and organizations, and also costs, because the costs are spiraling quite high. However, we noticed that if we didn't do it, it would have been even more complicated for people in the country to even start thinking about setting up a lab like that one. So it's a huge effort, but it's very valuable effort, we think.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there would be benefit in creating some kind of guide to setting up a functional microplastics lab, or functional plastic assessment lab? Do you have such a guide, such a document, and is that something that could be shared more widely for others interested in doing similar things?
We do not have anything like that. We are actually working now. It's the first time we are setting this remotely, so we are trying ourselves. And Adil, that I think is on the call, has been heavily involved with me in speaking with all the officers in the agencies that received the lab to be able to set everything up. And we're using everything. We're using calls. Now we are going to have a WhatsApp group in which they can just send us a picture of a machine and tell us, what do we do with this? How do we set this up? So it's very trial and error at the moment. But yeah, I think that some guidelines will be very useful. It's something that we might think developing, and again will be very useful, like the videos, to leave as a legacy in the country. So the project has a very long-term impact rather than having results just while the program is on. So it will be a very valuable deliverable, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think a really useful outcome from this meeting and this conversation perhaps would be simply to share some of these resources that exist. For instance, the training videos that various different people have prepared and produced, because while they might have, you know, local contextual differences that need to be considered and addressed, the core content of many of those training videos will be relevant in any lab, in any environment. And I think if we can do more to share that information around rather than duplicating it, that will be really, really useful. And of course, there is also the language issue. So, yeah, you know, being from Britain, I have this natural tendency to assume, quite ridiculously and arrogantly, that everybody understands English very well. And of course, we're all sitting here discussing in English, you know, what we might do. But there is obviously a need to be much more aware of local conditions and the possible need to communicate in different ways. So I think in that sense, videos are great because they're very visual, even if the language doesn't always get through. And I mean, we have a little bit use subtitling in multiple languages in some of our material, and I guess you might have done too.
Yeah, we did the same.
Yeah, so that is also a way forward where perhaps somebody can quite easily edit and adapt a resource without completely reproducing it, but can simply re-subtitle it in a new language, for instance, to make it more accessible to a particular community.
And I think if I can just add a little thing, that creating the network is very important, because if people get stuck at the first problem, it's very difficult to recreate momentum. So it's very important to have that constant feedback from experts, not only people that started building the lab, but also the international community, to be able to solve the problems. Because otherwise, if you cut the connections and there is no communication, it's the easiest way in which the lab that you have just built is not going to be used. So creating events like this one are very important for that one, just creating those connections and being able to give support to anybody that needs it.
Okay, does anybody else have any comments that they'd like to add to this conversation? I think there's been some good sharing of various bits of information and resources going on in the chat in the meantime, and that's great to see. And I see the next generation of interested receivers of our education perhaps has just been. So Holly, yes.
I just wanted to say one thing that I tried to allude on in the talk. Often we see what we've done really well and who's talking, and I know I'm quite vocal, so it's also about who's not coming to the meetings, who's not joining the network or writing papers on microplastics or things like that, and why, and trying to find ways to engage with them in different levels, because there is probably a reason why they, maybe they don't feel comfortable or things. And it was something that we struggled with when we were trying to get people to talk for each month. Initially we would reach out to people, and then we wanted our network members to come to us and say, I want to give a talk, I want to share my knowledge, and no one wanted to do that. And there was a reason that they didn't feel comfortable. So yeah, it's just something that we have constantly been discussing, and maybe it's useful for other people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's a really interesting observation.
Sorry, Andrew, can I just about Holly questions? Actually, I think Hannah have done a very good job for us for this symposium. She asked us to pre-record our talk. I think maybe it's a way for people not to feeling nervous to need to talk on the spot. So maybe pre-record is a good way, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that is really good, and it also perhaps for people who are a little less confident to present in English, it gives them an opportunity to maybe review their contributions and edit their contributions and so forth. So I think it is a very useful way to share information, and I hope, well, many of the talks from, obviously this symposium has been recorded, so I hope that it will be shared. I think, Hannah, you were planning to put it on the MyMIP YouTube channel, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Hopefully sometime next week the videos will be on there, and I'm just about to post the link to the MyMIP website in the chat again and on the whiteboard. Hopefully you can all see that as well.
Yeah, so hopefully that is a way that some of the thoughts, ideas and content from this symposium can be shared more widely going forward. So it might be worth just spending a few moments thinking about how we might move towards consistent practice and unification of methods. And I know this is something that Professor Izobe has been very, very keen to promote, and that we will be trying to move forward with in a wider Southeast Asian context. And obviously there are, quite a few sets of guidelines by now available from various international organizations. But I don't know how we move forward to the next step in terms of using those guidelines, or deciding whose guidelines we're going to use, or deciding why we think the guidelines aren't quite correct for a particular local context, and therefore, doing it somehow differently. And it's also a kind of bottleneck going forward. There is a desire to have uniform data that can be compared across countries and across regions. But obviously, whenever you unify practice, there is always the danger that you all unify on something that might be the lowest common denominator, or it might be deficient in some way to pick up particular important details or trends in local conditions. So I don't know what anybody thinks about that in terms of, the need to do that as a way forward, compared with potential risks of unifying and perhaps simplifying too soon. Okay, somebody, yeah, Atsuhiko, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I have a small comment. Probably Andrew deeply understand what I want to say. So harmonization and standardization is a very important keyword to make monitoring of ocean plastics, and to establish the monitoring network. And the baseline of that network or monitoring is to share the same guideline. And we already have guidelines for the microplastics and ocean plastics, but mostly guideline is adapted for the mid-latitude countries. So in the Southeast Asian country or South Asian country need so guidelines specified for their country. For example, we have a mangrove areas, we have a coral reef, we have a big river mouths. So in this case, we need the guideline of the microplastic monitoring specified for that areas. That is a new challenge to establish a new guideline. That is new challenge for the Asian or Southeast Asian researchers for the ocean plastic monitoring. Yes, thank you.
So there is a real need for Southeast Asian countries themselves and experts from those countries to get together to establish more specific, detailed guidelines within the general guidelines for those particular environments, and to ensure that they're working for those particular localized environments.
Yes, and in addition, that guideline can be used in other countries in the subtropical and tropical areas, such as African countries, or mid-American nations. So we have so many, so availability of that guideline. So we have to, so Southeast Asian countries or Asian countries, researchers should be the top of front runner to make such kind of the guidelines. I hope so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think there could be a really interesting opportunity there, Holly, perhaps for the African network, because I think it seems to me that there are quite a lot of projects running in Southeast Asia because it's regarded as the global hotspot, perhaps. You know, quite a few countries have initiatives linking with Southeast Asian countries to do this kind of study, and indeed we have a new project with Atsuhiko just starting. But I think if we can develop some of those guidelines, there may be a really good opportunity for the to review them in an African context and ask, are they fit for purpose in those environments, and to perhaps exchange and join some initiatives to create, when those guidelines are created, to test them out in other environments and find out to what extent they're fit for purpose and where the problems might arrive. Okay, so there's a couple. Yuna.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon. I thought I would jump in on that question about guidelines because I've been working on that topic for a number of years. The thing about guidelines is that there's two types. There's the types that the scientists worry about, and there's the types that the policymakers worry about. And we're a little bit stuck in between confusion in language, because people talk about guidelines, but they talk about different things. And what you have to be fully aware of is that Indonesia has already adopted its own guidelines for to guide methodology and sampling methodologies. So Malaysia is developing its own. And there's similar work that's being done throughout Southeast Asia. COPSI has a working group on marine litter that has a project on the development of guidelines, regional guidelines, that's now soon coming back to the policymakers for adoption. And there's a similar parallel project under the ASEAN. So we certainly, we do have a lot of paper on guidelines. And then what you end up seeing is that at the level of projects, well, you have to make do with what you have, right? So you have the guidelines, you glance at them, you have little time, and you have whatever you have. So then you have data that comes out. And we get back to square one. So I'm sort of two minds about all of this discussion on standardization, because on the one hand, we do need minimum comparability to be able to integrate data. But on the other hand, we also need to be able to acknowledge the difficulties and the realities of sampling. And so find ways towards comparability rather than seeking absolutely for, harmonization. I don't think that full harmonization is possible. The richest countries have tried and failed. You look at the discussion at OSPA, and that's not what they're doing. They're actually agreeing on indicators. So, yeah, just I think discussions to continue within scientists and to maybe push forward on how can we convert. And so when you look at two trawls of different sizes of plastic, whether macro or micro and whichever sizes, then the opening of the trawls, the depths at which the way the gear are operated will actually determine how comparable the data is. So, and that's where they are at the moment. They've reduced in the OSPA context, they've had to make systematic in order to be able to compare, they're comparing the catchability and they're looking at statistically what's the likelihood of catching certain profile of plastic material. And I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's the trial of error that they've gone through that has led them to that very pragmatic approach, and that would be quite useful to become a little bit more pragmatic also in the context of Southeast Asia, and acknowledge that we need to meet somewhere between the reality and the barriers that are encountered in the context of sampling and the desirability at policy level and the kind of considerations that the policymakers have when they agree on specific guidelines. So sorry, I thought I would jump in on there.
Yeah, okay.
I don't see any solutions, but
yeah, I think it's a really useful contribution and a really useful reminder that, of course, at the end of the day, we are all doing the best we can with what we have, but perhaps when we are considering setting up new initiatives and talking about how we might set up in-country capability or support in-country capability, there are definitely opportunities at that point to try and create some kind of uniformity of practice, perhaps. So it's true that it isn't always going to be achievable, and ultimately it might not be desirable, because the danger is always we all end up measuring the wrong thing. We all measure it very well and very uniformly, but if it turns out to be the wrong thing that we're measuring, then that uniformity and that effort is not necessarily going to provide the data stream that's required for future understanding and future policy. So
I'm not suggesting that comparability, that what you, I mean, I agree with the objective of and the need for comparability in data, and so some level of standardization where possible. I think that the discussion would benefit from being narrowed down to what it means to standardize and what would need standardization and what can be standardized, because then maybe it would become more feasible, because at the moment it's sort of a very big lump of a discussion and different people talk about it, but in fact they talk about something completely different, and that prevents from getting to a solution. That was more my point. Certainly it's worthwhile, necessary, and we should all try.
Yeah, and it actually reminds me of a lecture I heard a few months ago about ISO standards, and the fact that, despite the fact that ISO is an internationally recognized body, they have loads of committees in loads of different areas who are all discussing standardization issues. And even within ISO, I think they have 4 different committees discussing microplastics, and they can't even agree what the definition of a microplastic is, because all 4 committees all have different opinions, and they won't come together and decide. And I guess that kind of highlights the problem that you always have when you start to discuss these kind of international standardization things. And I guess OSPAR has a very long history, of course, of trying to do this for lots of different areas of measurement and science. So it's perhaps an interesting lesson for us to take away for that. Okay, I think you have a comment, Umberto.
Yeah, just for like a very practical solution that we would like to take on this. We discussed with you, Andrew, about developing a system to assess the comparability of the data from the different labs. So doing an exercise in which we send reference material. So even if the methodology is different, even if the sampling is different, at least we know that the data coming out from the lab are comparable. So if you're using the same methodology, the numbers make sense with each other. And this is something that we are developing on OCPP, not only for the labs that we developed during CLIP, but we would like to include any other lab that is working with Nile red to be sure that if I count 2 particles are the same 2 particles that would have been counted anywhere else, or if there is a lab that for problems of contamination they always count 4 instead of 2, at least it's something that is known and we can apply some form of correction to it. So as a practical way forward to standardization, it at least be sure that the numbers make sense.
Okay, I mean, obviously that's something we've been discussing internally, and I think there is a good opportunity here because the Malaysian network is using similar methodology to the methodology we're using at UEA, similar to the methodology that's being used at CEFAS and now in many of the in-country facilities that have been set up through CEFAS. So I think there's a very good opportunity there to do some kind of inter-lab comparison, and it's just a matter of getting that set up in an appropriate way, and I hope there will be will to do that within the labs that are involved in the new STAN project. I hope so, at least. Okay, I'm aware that we have now kind of reached the end of our discussion time, so perhaps it's time for me to hand over back to Hannah, who's been extremely diligently taking notes on our whiteboard. I don't know if everybody can see that because we had some problems sharing it yesterday, but Hannah's been filling in lots of detail about the discussion that's been taking place. So I thank you all for your contributions to that discussion, and hopefully we've captured some of the key points from it that we can then share in some way at the end of this symposium. So I'll now maybe just hand back to Hannah and to Annie to kind of summarise and tie up the symposium.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. It's just me, it's not Annie, that's fine. I think probably what's the most important thing to do following on from today is just to keep talking to each other, and I'm sure a lot of you were connected already before, but perhaps you've made some new connections through this event, so it would be great to kind of share details with each other. What I will do is send these kind of the whiteboards and some of the notes that we've done from the event to the email list that we had of participants. And then if you can kind of share that with your own organisations, that would be really useful. You've got the links to the YouTube channel in the chat, so perhaps you can go to that MyMIP link and bookmark it on your browser. And then if you follow us and subscribe our YouTube, you'll get notified when the new videos go up. So then you can watch them back if you want to, or share them with people from your network. That would be brilliant. I just want to say thank you to everyone for taking part, particularly all of the speakers. Thank you for the time that you put into preparing your presentations and sharing your work with us. And thank you for people who have joined and got involved in the chat and the conversations. It's been a brilliant event. So I think we may as well just round it off now. Some of us have been up for quite a long time, quite early, and I'm sure no one's going to complain if we finish 10 minutes early. So thank you all for coming, and keep connected with each other and keep up the good work. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye bye.
And I'd just like to finish, if I may, just by thanking Hannah so much for all her support and technical input to making sure that these communications and the symposiums and all kinds of events that she's been involved with throughout the GRTA project have gone ahead so smoothly. And many of you will be aware that Hannah is sadly leaving us. to start a new project and a new life after Christmas. So I'd just like to publicly thank you, Hannah, so much for your support, and to wish you well in your future endeavour. And I'm sure that your new project will benefit from all the skills that you've brought to this project. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Goodbye. And
Bye.
thank you, everybody, for participating. And I look forward to hearing from you. If anybody wants to email, please feel free to do so. So thank you very much for your inputs over the last 2 days.
Andrew, before
Yes.
you go, did you want to have a little debrief now before we sign off?
Yeah, we could do
If
that.
Moritz wants to stay on. Is Yen still here? Maybe not. Electra's still here. Hiya, Electra.
Hello.
Hi.
I think we just have one. There we are.
Hello. It's done.
Okay, it's done. Woo!
Hey, well
Done
done,
to you.
everybody.
It's kind of a different level of anxiety doing an online event to an in-person event. You don't need to worry about catering or accommodation, but you need to worry about people arriving and being able to do things technically.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, our ability to deal with the kind of the software and the electronic infrastructure around online meetings has improved quite a bit, but I have to admit I'm still really stressed by it. I find it, I don't quite feel in control when I'm standing in front of a room of people. I can see them, and I know they're there, and I know whether they're listening to me or not, and it just feels very different. Whereas online, you never really know what's going on, and I keep losing the controls that I need to see what's going on, and I still haven't figured out how to have them all on my screen at the same time.
Yeah. And you never know what other people are seeing either, because these online platforms show different screens depending what browser you're using, and whether you're a guest or whether you're kind of the host. So it's hard. Whereas, like you say, Andrew, if you're in the room, then everyone knows what's going on because it's all the same for everyone. Yeah.
I don't know if it's just me. When I share my screen and I'm actually presenting, I lose all the background stuff about who's logged on and what the chat's doing and all that stuff, and